Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Top 10 TV Shows of 2015. So this video is where I count down my favorite shows of 2015. I do look at an entire season that aired in 2015. However, for some shows that had seasons spread out over 2 calendar years, such as The Walking Dead, I'll count the season that finished in 2015. For example, with The Walking Dead, in 2015, the second half of Season 5 aired and the first half of Season 6 aired. However, I'm only counting Season 5 because I'm not going to split a season in half, and Season 6 hasn't finished yet, so I can't judge it. So even though the first half of Season 5 aired in 2014, I'll still count it as 2015. So this discounts Heroes Reborn being considered, even though 10 of its 13 episodes aired in 2015 and only the final 3 episodes will air in 2016. I'm still counting it as a 2016 show because that's when the season will finish. However, pretty much all the other shows in this list had seasons that were neatly fit into 2015, so the rest is all good. Also, just a side note, in some of my other reviews, I have given a rating from 1 to 10 on a season stating how good I think it is. Don't look for consistency in those ratings. Sometimes a show I gave a 9 to is lower than a show I gave an 8 to. That's just the way it goes. When I do individual ratings, partly I'm doing it comparatively to the rest of the show as opposed to other shows, whereas here I'm comparing them to other shows, so it turns out a little bit different. So I'll start off with my top 3 most disappointing seasons of 2015. So I'm not going to do a worst show list because I tried to avoid bad shows, so The Outlander would be the only show to end up on that list. Instead, I'll do my most disappointing seasons. So this is for good shows that have had great seasons in the past. However, the season that aired in 2015 failed to live up to the greatness that the show had set previously. So we'll start off with my number 3 most disappointing show of 2015, and that is Orange is the New Black Season 3. Now, I was never a huge Orange is the New Black fan. However, its first season was pretty powerful, and there were parts of Season 2 I found quite entertaining, whereas partway through Season 3, I really found myself wondering why I was still watching this show, as I wasn't really getting anything out of it, and was doing it more of an obligation to finish the season rather than being entertained. The power of its first 2 seasons lie mostly with its main character, Piper, who wasn't even a main character in Season 3 anymore. And more than that, they completely destroyed her character at this point, so I didn't even want to see her anymore. So it became a show about less interesting side characters, featuring some of the most boring and pointless flashback sequences I have ever seen on TV. Coming in at number 2 is Orphan Black Season 3. While Season 2 of this show wasn't that great either, Season 1 was phenomenal, and it was really sad to see how far the show has fallen as they take the plot to ridiculous and absurd places and completely rewrote and changed characters and made up ludicrous plot twists in order to keep alive a storyline that obviously should have ended last season. I very nearly gave up on the show entirely halfway through the season. However, I was rewarded by not doing that, as the end of the season did get much better, but it's still very disappointing when compared to Season 1. And my number 1 pick for most disappointing show in 2015 is House of Cards Season 3. House of Cards has always been a cinematic quality drama. Although Season 1 did bore me at times, it was still overall a great watch, and Season 2 was absolutely amazing and had me on the edge of my seat the whole time. Season 3 had potential, but it was squandered. Season 3 ruined the character of Francis Underwood, as in the first 2 seasons he was portrayed as a sly man who could talk anyone into doing anything and who could talk himself out of any bad situation situation, whereas in Season 3 he failed miserably, was constantly defeated by a government that didn't want him, a Russian president much better than him, and even his own wife. The season could have been great if the ending was good. It could have redeemed itself, but the ending was awful. One of the worst finales I've ever seen. It completely destroyed a side character whom I never want to see again, and instead of resolving the story I cared about, it focused on a story I care nothing about, making Season 3 of House of Cards the most disappointing show of 2015. So now let me move on to my top 10 favorite shows of 2015, and I'll start off with an honorable mention that didn't quite make my top 10 list, and that is Vikings Season 3. This season was pretty good. It kept me interested and invested, but it wasn't the best season of Vikings. It focused too much on the Paris storyline when I was more interested in the England storyline, but it was still good. A lot of character development and whatnot, so a decent season. So now, on to my top 10, starting with my number 10, Jessica Jones Season 1. This was a dark and gritty show pulled off really well with a cast of characters you really cared about and a villain who was pure evil and one of the creepiest villains ever to appear on television. I loved watching a show where the main character was played by the woman who played Jesse's girlfriend in Season 2 of Breaking Bad, who was basically just playing the same character but with superpowers. This was a great introductory season, and even if the story did drag at some times. Number 9 is Fear the Walking Dead Season 1. In my opinion, this show gets a lot more flack than it deserves. I actually quite enjoyed the show, and in some ways, even more so than the main Walking Dead show, which is surprising because I didn't think I'd like this show at all. What saved it for me was that it was more about the characters than the zombies, and unlike the main show, which got bogged down with far too many characters that die off far too easily, I actually felt connected to these characters who were believable as they slowly started to deal with the incoming zombie apocalypse. I thought it was pulled off really well, and it had me hooked throughout. Number 8 is Daredevil Season 1. Another show I didn't think I'd like because I'm not a fan of comic book movies, but this show was actually quite believable. It took its time to develop well-rounded and interesting characters and set up a scenario for our hero to overcome by having to defeat an immensely powerful villain who owned half the city. It had me on the edge of my seat a lot, and very rarely did it have to resort to cheesy comic book tropes. And it was never afraid to be edgy, but in a way that didn't seem too deliberate. Certainly an enjoyable show. Number 7 is Sense8 Season 1. I was really impressed with this show as it followed 8 different people in different parts of the world who shared a psychic connection. Many complained that the show moved too slowly at the start or took too long to get started, where I completely disagree because they were trying to establish 8 different storylines, so I was glad they took their time to establish them properly because it got me to care about these very different characters. When they all came together at the end, it was a beautiful thing. Number 6 is The Walking Dead Season 5. Just when I was about ready to quit on the show, this season comes along, which is by far my favorite season of the show thus far, as it began Season 5 with a bang and one of the most exciting episodes. In fact, rarely did this season slip into the boring, slow-paced storytelling, which is typical the downfall of this show. This season kept a fast pace and got me to care about the characters involved, and finally got them places as they ended up in Alexandria, Virginia at the end of the season, with a community of people that hadn't had to deal with the horrors of the zombie apocalypse like our heroes had, and seeing them clash together was interesting as hell. Number 5 is Mr. Robot Season 1, an amazing first season where I was completely blown away by the cinematography, the editing, the music, the acting, and just the overall style. This had a cinematic quality rarely seen on TV, but more than that, the storytelling was amazing as it got us inside the head of an antisocial hacker who is uncomfortable around people and slowly losing his mind, and it got us to sympathize with him. Not an easy task, but the show pulls it off well. It does kind of falter a bit in the mid-season, which is why this isn't at the top of my list, but even taking that into account, this show is still a wonderful piece of art that definitely needs to be seen. Number 4 is Humans Season 1. The thing that struck me most about this show is how it was consistently good through its entire 10-episode season's run. This is a rare thing. Even in my favorite shows of all time, they all dip in quality from time to time, but not this show. It was solid throughout as it told an ever-interesting story of a time where robots, or synths as they're referred to in the show, are commonplace in society and deal specifically with a group of sentient AIs who have to deal with the people that fear them. I felt the slow build of the season worked beautifully well as you really got to care about all the different characters before bringing them all together in a way that really paid off in spades. I can't wait for season 2. Number 3 is Better Call Saul Season 1. There was a lot of tension surrounding this spin-off of Breaking Bad, but I think the general consensus is that it paid off in spades. This is a very different show from Breaking Bad with a different tone, but it features all the best qualities of that show, such as amazing cinematography, top-notch acting, and gripping stories. While the show wasn't always on point and could move slowly at times, when it was at the top of its game, it was completely amazing. Season 1 of Better Call Saul is one of those seasons you have to watch more than once, as it completely subverts your expectations and constantly pulls the rug out from under you where things aren't quite what you thought they seemed to be. So watching it a second time after you know what will happen gives you a whole new perspective on it, and only a few rare shows are incredible enough to pull this off. So now we come to the nitty gritty, my top 2, and for my number 2, it should be noticed this was very seriously considered for my number 1. In fact, I had to mull this over for a while, which one I wanted to put at number 1 or number 2, and I finally decided on this, but it was a really close call. And my pick for the second best show of 2015 is The Leftovers Season 2. This season was simply phenomenal and it blew me away at every turn. It was a truly unique viewing experience. I really enjoyed Season 1, but I wouldn't describe it as great. Season 2 most certainly was, which is why it came off as such a pleasant surprise. I heard others say that they thought this season had a slow start, but I could not possibly disagree more. This season was on point. Every single episode with only one exception, and it constantly subverted expectations and broke every convention in the book. Season 2 is something truly unique and a work of art in its own right. Everything just fit together perfectly to tell a story of Kevin trying to put his family back together by moving to a town where no departures occurred, and there he meets John Murphy, whose family is slowly starting to crumble around him, thus paralleling Kevin's journey. And then the end of the season takes a huge risk that pays off in the best way imaginable, making this one of the best years of television I have ever seen, and makes a real tough contender for my number 1 slot. But in the end, I have to give my number 1 slot to what I think was the best show in 2015, and that is Game of Thrones Season 5. Was there ever any doubt? Now, I know a lot of people love to hate on Season 5, and I've even heard a few people say Game of Thrones was nowhere near the best show of 2015, and I could not possibly disagree more. In my opinion, even the worst season of Game of Thrones is still far superior than the best season of most TV shows in existence. And if you've seen my top 5 seasons of Game of Thrones video, you'll know I don't think Season 5 was the worst season of Game of Thrones. Personally, I feel that people who think Season 5 was the worst season are looking at the glass half empty. While sure, it contained the Dorne storyline, which was the worst storyline the show has ever done, and the Sansa storyline was a letdown, and Brienne just stood in the snow all season long. But to me, these faults are by far outweighed by the awesomeness in this season, which far outshines anything else on TV. In my opinion, the hard home sequence alone makes this show better than the majority of other shows. In fact, I'd go as far to say if season 5 was nothing but the Krappen dorm and then the hard home sequence, it would still be better than pretty much any show on television. But it wasn't just the hard home sequence. You also had a lot of other amazing stuff, such as the Drogon fight in the Danzak's pit, and those were some of the best sequences this amazing show has ever had. Add to that, Arya's storyline was also on point and had an amazing mind-bending conclusion that completely blew my mind. Tyrion's storyline was great as ever as he struggled to make his way to Meereen, and it was so rewarding when he finally did. The Wall storyline, although in my opinion failed to live up to the source material, was still great and had some amazing moments such as the aforementioned hard home, seeing Jon become Lord Commander and execute those in his way, to the tragic ending that storyline had. And I know many disagree, but I absolutely loved the Stannis storyline this season. It was my favorite the show has done for him thus far, as I found the ending was brutally tragic and pulled off amazingly well. I've heard some people say that the start of the season was too slow and it took too long for the season to get interesting. While I agree the start of the season did have its slow parts, I think that is mostly not true because people who say this are forgetting the King's Landing storyline, which took place almost entirely before episode 8, and this storyline was absolutely amazing, one of the best storylines the show has ever done, as Cersei and Marjorie play a passive-aggressive game of chess and features some amazing acting by Lena Headey as Cersei, who was absolutely robbed of an Emmy this year. When you stack up all of what was great about this season, it still far outshines most other shows on TV. In my opinion, to compare this to something like Mad Men or House of Cards is a bit of a farce. Season 5 of Game of Thrones was amazing and my pick for best show of 2015. So that's it for my top 10 favorite TV shows of 2015. Make sure to join me in 2016 as I plan on doing weekly episode reviews for pretty much every show on this list. And if you're as big a Game of Thrones fan as I am, check out my channel for weekly videos on Game of Thrones as we count down to season 6. And make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.